Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Programming with Patrick. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. So I was on the subreddit Learn Programming, and if anybody doesn't know, Reddit is a social media site where it's very much like a forum for discussion, and there's sub forums called subreddits where you can discuss things for a particular topic. And so if you have never been on Learn Programming and you're just getting started, I would recommend checking it out. Reddit.com/r/learn programming. And they have a bunch of information that can be useful if you're just getting started, and you can go there and ask questions if you're looking to learn something in particular. So I was browsing it, and there's this person, Inquisitive Kitmouse, who was looking for feedback on improving their code. And so they were asking just ways to structure their code better. So I left a comment with some general ideas to maybe try to improve it, but it was a little bit difficult to give feedback without seeing the code. And so they replied with the code. So I went ahead and copied that code into this editor. So I'm using PyCharm. You can use any text editor, but this is what I'll be working with today. So they're looking for feedback on how to improve the structure of their code. And so I think that this would probably be beneficial for people who would like to kind of see like a code review process. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of walk through this and try to explain my thoughts about like what I'm seeing and ways to try to improve what is seen. Excuse me. So for this video, I don't plan on editing it. I'm just going to upload it straight to YouTube, probably where you're watching it now. So apologies if there's any like long pauses. It's just because I'm thinking about things, and I'll try my best to make sure there's a lack of dead time, so to speak. Okay, so what their program does, in a nutshell, it seems to take a list of stations or stuff like that, and it's very weather oriented. So taking data related to weather. So I think they manually downloaded some weather data, and what they're doing is they're processing it. So they're taking these files and extracting certain pieces of information, and then once they have that information, I think they're just outputting it into whether it's a new CSV or something like that. So it's very much like a data in, data out kind of program. And the person said that when they pasted this, that they have already tried to start like doing a little bit of restructuring, but they're still just working on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just scrolling through so you can see the different functions that they have. And when I first looked at this, I haven't touched the code yet, but when I first looked at this, I noticed that in this particular function, parse clim grid, I'm assuming CLIM is climate, so parse climate grid is it's pretty deep in terms of indentation, and so I think this is where I'm going to go ahead and start. So as a general rule of thumb, if you have a lot of indentations in your code, like because you have nested if statements, you have nested for loops, you have nested, like just a bunch of nested things, that's typically a sign of an area where you could probably clean up. And the reason for that is every time that you nest something, you're adding a layer of complexity to that piece of code or that function. So there's a test, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like the McClinsky test, I don't know, but it's like a mix something complexity test, and what it does is it just like measures how many times you have nested things and how many like different branches you're having in your code with if statements, and each time you have a different kind of branch or nested loop, it adds to that complexity. So it gives your code like a score. And generally, if it's too complex, it's hard to read, and it can be hard to work on if you come back to it, say, a week from now or 6 months from now. So let's try to reduce this complexity here and just go from there. So pause. Wait 1 second. Okay, so I paused the video in my recording, so I have to kind of get back to what I was talking about. But so we have this function, and we're looking to kind of reduce the complexity. So to start to walk through it, so here it looks like we have, I'm just starting with this for loop inside this function. So we're iterating over a list of files. For each file, we're opening it up as an archive. Inside the archive, there are more files. And for each file inside of that, we're going to process it. So, excuse me. So if the file doesn't have a specific word in its name, then we're going to skip it. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and process it, and we're going to extract. We're going to get all the lines inside of the file. So they're probably like a CSV or something like that. Maybe a space delimited file, because if we keep reading, we look and say, okay, if the file has a certain name to it, so it has PRCP, probably for like precipitation, temperature average, temperature minimum, temperature maximum. If it has any of these names, we're going to process it. Otherwise, we're just printing off that we couldn't parse that value. Okay. So let's go ahead and try to simplify this. So the first thing that I see is we have this if, else, if blocks, and the code inside of them are very similar. And really the only difference that I can see is, so like this first row is the same between all of them. The second row is the same between all of them. And the third row is almost the same. The only difference is that it has a zero, like this index here is just a certain digit based on this T max, T min, T average, or precipitation. So because all of this code is nearly identical, but the only difference is based on this name, we give it a different number. What we can do is we can write something. I'm just going to write it here. There could be a better place to put it, but I'm just going to refer to this as so we're taking the value name, and from the value name we're producing an index number. So I'm just going to refer to this as value index map. And what this is it's going to be a dictionary. And based on whatever value name you feed it, it's going to spit out a number. And that number is going to be the index that is used for that piece of code. And then the last one is Tmax 3. Okay. So we have this value index map. And what this allows us to do is we can, I'm going to handle this case first, where the value name is not inside of this mapping. So let's add a comment that says skip if value, well, the code is probably going to be self-explanatory, but if value name is not in value index map dot keys, I don't think you actually need to do dot keys, but just for verbosity, I'm going to use dot keys. So if our current value name is not in one of these keys, then we're just going to continue. But first we're going to print what we wanted to print here. Okay. And okay. And as a suggestion, we have this print, just it says failed to parse value name. Something that might be beneficial is to add something like file name was something, and then value name was something. And then what we can do is add both the file name as well as the value name. So then that way, when you print it out, it actually has some context that you can refer to later. So we have that. Now, what we can do is we can go ahead and start to reduce this code, simplify it. So because we already checked to make sure that value name is inside of value index map, what we can do is we can extract, so we can say value index is equal to value index map dot get, and then the key, which is value name. You could also do value index map and then value name. That works too. So we have value index, and so now what we can do is just start to, I'm going to copy this code, and this time instead of grid row latitude longitude 0, we can just use value index. Oops. And what this will do is allow us to delete all of this code because it's all like duplicates. Okay. And so already we reduced some complexity. We don't have as many nested ifs and for loops, but then also if I hop back to the original pasting, the original had 290 lines. We're still at like 290. So we haven't exactly saved any lines of code, but this is probably easier to read now, at least this section. So let's keep going and try to simplify this function even more so. All right, so we have this if not consensus continental United States. So if con US is not in the file name, we're going to just skip it. Else we'll do the stuff. So something that I'm going to do here is with Python, you can use, as I demonstrated here, not in, rather than not and then wrapping stuff. To me, I feel like it's a lot easier to read if the only thing that you have is if not inning something. It's probably easier to just read it as. So if the continental US is not in the file name, then we're going to continue. And because this is the only excuse me, because this is the only condition that we're doing, and all the rest of our logic is inside this else block, what we can do is really get rid of the else and dedent, if that's a word, all this code to be on the same level. And the reason that we can do this is this if this statement is true, this whole statement is true, we're going to continue, which means that we're going to skip all of this, jump to the end, and begin our next iteration. So because we're going to skip all of that anyways, we don't really need to keep all this code inside an else block. So that can help reduce the complexity. Okay, so this is already a couple indentations flatter than before, so that's good, and I feel like it's probably a little bit easier to read now. So let's go ahead and keep looking at other things that we could do. So let's see. So kind of looking at this whole function here, this inside of this, when we open up an archive, we're doing a lot of stuff. So we get all the files inside the archive. We are going to iterate over those files, extract information, and store it inside of this grid object. It looks to be like some kind of, so yeah, some kind of dictionary. So we have this dictionary, and we want to save to that dictionary. And then after we're saving to it, we want to iterate through it and write some information down to a row in some CSV that we have open. I'm trying to figure out, where does W come into play? When do we open up W? So W is a CSV writer to, just standard out. Okay. So we're just writing this basically to the console, which is fine. Okay. So we build this grid, and we start to iterate over all the files in some file list. So a list of archives. I'm thinking there's a way to break this up some more. So, like, for instance, we could probably extract a function out of this. And I think that is what I'm going to try to do here. I'm thinking, so we have a bunch of files. We do some validation on the file names. Then we read the data from the file names. After we read the data, we process each line in the data, and then save that to our local variable. I'm sure there's a better way to handle this. I'm just struggling to think about the best way to do it right now. Because I'm thinking about how we're like, it's interesting how there's this grid. I guess it probably makes sense to take a step back and look at the whole thing. So with this climate grid map, what it's doing is we're taking a dictionary. Inside of this first block, we're just reading all the latitude and longitude coordinates and appending them to just a list. And then what we're doing is we're taking that list of tuples, and we're saying, okay, make a dictionary where each latitude, longitude tuple is the key, and then make a list of 4 blank strings. So with that, we have this kind of like filled in grid. But I'm looking and it's like we aren't really utilizing the grid for anything else other than to write everything out once it's done. And that's, I'm wondering, well, I guess we need to wait until we process all of these files inside of this archive before we can print out the current information. Yeah, I can see why you have this code commented out about clearing out the dictionary, because I can imagine that if you have 2 different archives and one of them writes to, say, 10 different latitude longitudes and the second one writes to 9 of the latitude longitudes, and you have one that's still going to exist, but really the data is from the other archive. So I'm a little bit confused about maybe what the desired intent is. So I don't know if I'm going to look at this section much more. Because if the desire is to, you just want to write out the grid whenever you're done processing one archive, then I would probably look at getting rid of the grid. And you could probably just write stuff. Like you could figure information out almost like dynamically as you're opening up these archives. Because looking at here, you open up the first file in the file list and generate the latitude, longitude records. So I think that you could probably get away with not doing that, or just doing it, not doing it before, like in this area, but instead actually do it when you open up the archive. So I would probably look at modifying this section in order to maybe accommodate this. And that when you do that, you might find that you have like 2 functions that could be extracted away. So like one function can be processing the value index, but then another part is like processing the latitude, longitude. So again, I don't want to make code changes because that's like one way to do it. But if you intend to use like this whole mapping of grid and everything like that in the future, I mean, I would be cautious just because you might not be, it depends on the data set, that you might have stale data between archives. So I'm going to pause working on this parse climate grid for a bit. So let's go ahead and look at some other stuff and see if we can clean it up. So parse Sunny. Similar thing with before, where if you have an if and you're just continuing and then else your stuff, like the main logic that you want to actually run, you can really just get rid of the else and just process that. also, let's see, parse Sunny. So just walking through it. So we have all files. We're gathering all files that match this pattern. And we're going to write to standard out. And so for each file inside of all files, we're going to open it up using gzip because it's compressed. And once we open it up, we are going to read it as a CSV. Latitude and longitude are certain parts. And then for each row, if it's the first line, continue. Otherwise, we're going to extract information from it and write out. So I think overall, this is okay. Something that I don't know if it would be better. Like, I find it weird that when you open or when you iterate through R, there's this variable on R line that is, or this variable line num that's changing on R for each iteration that goes through. To me, that seems like it's probably fine, but it just seems kind of error prone-ish. So it's something that you could consider doing is with Python, you could do something like this. Using the enumerate function. If you aren't familiar with it, I would look it up. Okay. So just to give you an idea, if you have some iterable thing, what you can do is you can use enumerate, and what it will just keep spitting out is a tuple rather than just the one object. But the tuple has the first item as the index, like what number are you at right now, and the second item is the actual object itself. And so what this allows you to do is, again, this very similar thing, which is, you can skip the first row, but to me, this just seems better. Like, it just feels better to me, because then you aren't relying on your core object that you're iterating on inside of your loop. So it kind of like separates your core, like your loop logic, from what you're iterating with. So just a suggestion. It's also kind of interesting that I didn't realize that you're reading the row and then you're writing it out. So that's kind of funny. But again, I know that, and I keep saying you because I imagine that Inquisitive Kitmouse is probably the only person that's actually going to watch this. But yeah, so let's see. Okay, continuing with this. We parse state population. So we open up our CSV writer, we take in a file, we're reading it, we parse it as a CSV, and what we're looking to do is we iterate through each one, and first we check, is it the first line? If it is, we skip it. Then we check if an element in the row is District of Columbia or contains balance of, then we skip it. Otherwise, we can will continue if the first element in the row has this 0, 4, 0. It equals 0, 4, 0. Then we extract certain information and we write it out. So immediately, if you have else continue and it's at the very end of your function or your if block, you could probably get rid of it. You're going to, and at the end of the loop, like it's going to continue no matter what, so you don't need to do that. Also, so now that we got rid of that, we have this else and immediately followed with an if and nothing else. So this could be reduced down to else if, and we can dedent that one so that it doesn't necessarily simplify the logic, but it does at least make things more clean, I feel. Also, we have all of these conditions that will continue. This is more of a stylistic comment, but you could leave it as is, and I think like that's fine. Something else that you could do is you could wrap this whole thing with, here, I'm actually going to copy this block just to show for reference. I'll have it commented out. But you could do something like this. Actually, it might be better to have or at the front. Okay. So both of these, this code up here, as well as this code down here, is logically equivalent. So if this is true, we'll continue, but if that's false, but the second line is true, we'll continue. But if both of these are false and this final one is true, then we'll continue. But if all of these are false, we're going to go to this next branch. And so you can see that these would be equivalent. But there's definitely argument that you could say, well, we're combining this check for our line num with this row check. And that's where what I might recommend in the end is maybe you have something like this. Okay. So with this code, you're checking if we're on the first line, we continue. And then else if and we have this logic that checks element 9 in our row. And I feel like it's very appropriate to group these together because maybe there's a function that you could really extract from this to provide the check. And then finally, you just do your stuff. Also, while working on this, something that I thought about is because you want to skip the first line in your enumeration there, you could probably use Python splicing to just skip that without any logic. So I'm just doing a quick search here because I tend to forget how to do the proper splicing. So Python. Python all but first in the list. So something that you might be able to do, I don't know if it's compatible with CSV Writer, but you could change this from R row in R to R row in for row in R1 colon. And what this will do is it skips the first element, assuming that you can access this via like this getter and or this whatever, and you can, it will skip the first element and just give you the rest of the list. And so if we were to consolidate this code now, we would get something like this, where for row in everything but the first line inside the CSV, we're going to run this code. And so let me actually do that down here, just as like another example. So for row in R1 colon, and so that again reduces the complexity. We don't have this if statement. We can just read this code and understand that we're starting from index 1 rather than index 0, and we're going through. So let me delete this comments here. I don't know if we do that check down here anywhere. I don't recall. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, so I think this is a much cleaner function now. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not sure if there's really anything else to do. We can't dedent this code because we need to make sure that the first element has 040. So yeah, this is probably okay. All right, and just kind of going through. I think you could probably apply the same kind of logic here. Because this logic is pretty similar to this logic down here, there might be something you can do to extract a function out of it. So ignoring the fact that there is no R variable inside of this parse city population, not sure why, I feel like it might be missing this code here. Something, yeah, I'm just kind of looking at this. So I'm noticing that all of this logic is pretty much the same, except for this time, if it's a city population, you skip row 40, or any row that contains 040 in the first element. Otherwise, you do a little bit more checking, and then you do some more parsing. So I definitely feel like you could extract a function out of this, at least primarily. I think you could probably actually, I don't know, it's probably okay. I just let me see where you actually utilize this. Oh, so I'm guessing you use the, like, I don't know, IPython or something in order to actually run these commands. So something that I would probably suggest is inside of your Python file here. Oh, you do run this. So maybe you just change that at the bottom. I don't know. Like, I would figure out if you're only running each of these like one at a time, then maybe it makes sense that you have like separate functions to handle everything. But if you're looking to run all of these at the same time, or you're looking to just like you take in a file, so like for instance, you have this input file, and you probably feed the same input file into this function here too. Then you would benefit from figuring out, okay, first let me open the file, read in the file, and then send. There, I'm just going to comment down here just like as an example. Then you would say parse state population CSV, I don't know, and you give it R. And I just pretending that this isn't exactly parse state population, but really it's like parse file. And you might have another function, parse what is it? City population. R. So like that's one thing that you could do, or something else that you could do is while you're iterating through the rows for row in, and you always skip the first row, you could say parse, oops, I just want to comment, parse state population, or maybe like write state population row, and then you have a different function for write city population. And so what you can do is, instead of iterating through all those rows in that CSV twice, you can just do it once, and for each row you check some conditionals and you write it out. So basically taking this code and extracting it into a function called write state population. Same with this, you could extract all of this into code that says write city population. I don't know, just some ideas. Okay, just kind of going through. And same kind of stuff you could probably do here. It looks like this code you probably have been messing around with relatively recently. So yeah, overall, I think the code is fine. I definitely think that there's probably things that could be improved, but as you work out your use case for this code, I don't know what you're using this for exactly, but as you figure out the use case for it, I think that's probably the biggest thing that helps determine how you want to structure your code. Because, yeah, like if you're only looking to get city population data or state population data in one shot and you don't care about anything else, then it's okay to just have this function and just leave it as is. But if you're looking to kind of get a bunch of data at one time, or if you're looking to get a bunch of data out of the same data set, that's where functions probably will come more into play, where you might have a function just for opening the file and reading it, and then you have a group of functions that parses that row in order to help reduce the amount of like read-write you're doing from disk, as well as what else? And just the number of times you're iterating through those rows, because I know I've downloaded some like weather data before, and it can be very large number of rows. So just to help, reduce the strain on your CPU. Okay, but with that, I think I'm going to stop there. These are just some suggestions. I'm not any like super expert. I've just been programming for a while now, and these are just some immediate feedbacks that I could probably give. But I hope this helps, and I hope this helps if like anybody else is watching this video. I hope this can give some ideas about how to think about your code, walk through it, and determine like what's the best way to handle things. And again, this is not final. It's really, really, how you write code is really dependent on how you use it. So there's no wrong way, and there's a million ways to do things. So hope this helps, and I'll see you all later.